The name's Bourne. Jason Bourne. What's going on today, guys? So in one of my previous videos, I promised that I'd be reviewing the film The Bourne Identity, as well as The Bourne Supremacy and The Bourne Ultimatum in preparation for Jason Bourne, or in this case, Bourne 5, coming out at the very end of July. I'll be reviewing each of these films once a month in preparation for it. And today, as I just stated, we're going to be talking about The Bourne Identity, which is directed by Doug Liman and stars Matt Damon, Franka Potente, and many others. This movie came out in the year 2002, a very, very important year for a number of reasons. For one, as I'm going to state later on in this video, this movie takes place in a post-9/11 world where surveillance becomes a big thing. We're always worried about who's around us. Do they have bombs? Do they have something? Are they assassins? We don't know. But this was also the year that we saw the film Die Another Day, which for most is considered to be the worst James Bond movie of all time. This movie took James Bond from GoldenEye, which was a very, very great movie, and I love watching it. It took it from a serious movie to just an over-the-top, goofy, stupid movie that just was awful because it failed to do anything great, and it felt very cliched. So having a movie like The Bourne Identity come out in 2002 was very, very important. This is a thinking man's action movie. This is the kind of movie that requires you to sit down and think about every single little plot detail. Kind of like the Mission Impossible movies, except for Part 2 because that one's awful. They are thinking man's action films, and The Bourne Identity is an absolute classic because rewatching this movie, I absolutely was on the edge of my seat. It still remains a fresh, fast-moving, strong action thriller that just did so much right. So let's talk about The Bourne Identity today, and guys, just a heads up, there will be spoilers throughout this entire review, so please, if you have not watched The Bourne Identity, what are you doing? Please go and watch the movie and come back to this video. This movie tells the story of a young assassin named Jason Bourne who wakes up on this boat after being found nearly dead. Having no idea who he is, how he got to the boat. He can't remember anything, so the movie tries to spend a lot of time trying to get him to remember things, even though he just can't because he has amnesia. He then discovers that he's being chased by members of his own organization, and they send out agents to kill him because he failed a mission and they want him dead. And right after his daring escape from that awesome sequence at the bank, he ends up meeting this woman named Marie, played by Franka Potente. I hope I'm pronouncing that right. He tells her he'll pay her $10,000 to drive him from Switzerland to Paris because that's where he hopes he can find more about himself. Now, I'll be honest, guys, rewatching the movie, I was a bit concerned, hoping that it wouldn't feel just incredibly dated and old and just, we've seen this before and it's been beaten like many of the first movies of big franchises. But actually, I think The Bourne Identity remains a smart, fast-paced action thriller, as I said before, that just feels so good. It felt so different for that time period, and in this day and age, save for a couple of things, I do think this movie holds up extremely well. The Bourne Identity is a movie that's also known unanimously for its invention of something called the shaky cam, which is used in almost every single action movie you can think about today. Rewatching this movie, though, there wasn't as much shaky cam as I remember it to be, or nearly as much as the sequels, because those movies have so much shaky cam and a lot of that quick cut editing that they basically kind of invented. If there's one thing we all gotta praise in this movie, it's of course Matt Damon. Matt Damon is Jason Bourne. It's not like he plays that character, I just know it. When I see the words Matt Damon is Jason Bourne, I believe it. Because he's actually a real Jason Bourne. Not like that terrible Bourne Legacy movie. You have no idea what's going to happen to these characters. You have no idea why these people are chasing Bourne. Who they are even, or what organization they're even from. I feel like Doug Liman really did a fantastic job directing this movie. However, in between this movie and Edge of Tomorrow, his directing career was just okay. But I really like the fact that he directed this movie because it moves at a very, very good pace. There's barely a second to breathe. There's barely any stops in the pacing, and that's what I love about movies. One thing that I usually always complain about in a movie is when they have the relief moment. You know what I mean? Whenever there's like this big action sequence, there's always that 5 minutes or maybe like 2 to 5 minutes of time where the characters might just be sitting around and kind of doing nothing. You don't really care about it as much in a lot of those action films. That's not the case here. I actually really cared from scene 1 to the very last scene. Let's talk a little bit about Marie, played by Franka Potente. I think she's very underrated and very overlooked. She's basically a refugee or an immigrant that decides to help Jason because she knows that with that money, she might provide a better life for herself. And the fact that she gets entangled in this web of mystery, action, and death just is very terrifying for her. But I like the fact that she doesn't always play the scared girl. She does help out Jason a lot, and yes, he does do a lot of the fight sequences, but I feel like she brings a lot of warmth and charisma to the role. But above all, I really like the fact that she had an emotional attachment to Jason because he saved her life. Now, you guys obviously know that what I hate the most in action movies or sci-fi movies or like these major blockbuster films is that they try to shoehorn a stupid romance into it that just doesn't work. It always falls flat. But in this case, I actually really felt the romance. I felt a connection. There was a real emotional connection with these characters. I think that's thanks to the brilliant screenplay written by Tony Gilroy because their love just felt real. It felt like an original, fresh take on the spy genre. And I still feel like it is yet to be matched by anything else in this century. Now, as I said before, this movie came out in the year 2002, which is right after 9/11. And because of this, surveillance became the major way on how to track people, and there were cameras set up everywhere trying to spy on other people. The filmmakers understood the realism to everything and decided to make a very compelling story, and I just love this movie. It revolutionized action. Now, let's talk about the action sequences, because I briefly mentioned the aesthetics of them. But to go more in depth, let's talk about the sequence where the guy attacks Bourne in his room in Paris. This sequence is just great, but unfortunately this is where one of my few flaws comes in, and that is without a doubt the punching sound effects. Now, many of you guys may consider this to be nitpicking. I understand that. However, I cannot escape the fact that the punching sound effects in this movie just do not sound good at all. They don't hold up at all. They sound like the punching sound effects that you would see in a 90s to very early 2000s television show. In fact, this is actually an issue I have with all three movies. The punching sound effects just sound fake. They sound so computerized that it just almost takes me out of those sequences, even though they are just spectacular to look at. This is then, of course, followed by one of the best car chases I've actually ever seen. It's very well directed, it's swiftly paced, and it just moves so nice. And this was the movie that introduced me to the theme Ready, Steady, Go by Paul Oakenfold, which was also used in the film Collateral, which is just amazing. But in this movie, it just sounds so good. It just makes the scene feel so badass. I feel as though if this song was not in there, the scene would not feel the same. What I really like about this movie is not just the action sequences and the intrigue, it's the idea, the concept. This is really a story about a man who has no idea who he is. He has no idea what his past is, and yet he is being targeted, and we discovered that he's actually an assassin. Can you imagine being in that man's shoes and finding out that your previous life was basically killing people? Now, definitely the most underrated thing about this movie is Clive Owen. Now, I had no idea that that was Clive Owen in this movie. No idea. So, rewatching the movie, I just realized this guy was amazing. He definitely would have made a fantastic Bond, but unfortunately, he's just too old right now. I think he's maybe 52. He was just always the sneaky guy. He could just get in and out of places real easily. He could shoot anyone. And we find out that he's actually connected to Jason Bourne with something called Treadstone, which will definitely be revealed in the sequels because obviously at this point you have no idea what that is. And I just love the scene when they confront each other in that little cornfield that's basically dead. It just is so good, and it just proves how top-notch of a movie this is. Now keep in mind that we're about 20 minutes away from the ending of the film once that moment happens. So we've spent the entire film basically with this character having no idea who he is, no idea who's after him, no idea why they're after him, and then we hear this mention of something called Treadstone, which is some sort of special organization that they basically genetically modified these people, and I feel like it's just a great way to set up its sequel. Another underrated element to this movie is that it introduced us to Brian Cox and Julia Stiles, both characters that I thought were only in the Bourne Supremacy and Ultimatum, but upon rewatch I was like, oh, they're in the first movie? I completely forgot about that because they're just very overlooked. And when you go back to rewatch the movie, you discover that they're very important pawns to the entire story. And we also discover that Brian Cox has a ton of clues to Jason's past, which he needs so much. But he's only in contact with basically the second higher up. And I just love the spiral staircase sequence. Oh my god. It still holds up. But the one moment that I'm like, is when he pushes the guy off and then he knows exactly where the other guy is in the spiral staircase, pulls the trigger and fires, and I'm like, no, that would not happen. For a movie that's this realistic, that was kind of the only over-the-top moment, but I'll let that pass because it's still a great sequence. Now let me discuss a couple of minor issues I have with this movie. For one, the computers in this movie are just laughable. They look so old and dated. It's one of the few things that makes this movie not completely hold up. Marie's family, I thought, was another issue because they just randomly show up and then they just randomly leave. And we never get to see them again. Even in the sequels, we never get to see the rest of her family. And I find that that's kind of unfortunate because a way that it could have went down is that Jason Bourne would have found out after Marie was killed in the Bourne Supremacy. He could have also found out that her family was killed too, which leads him to an even bigger drive for revenge. That could have been expanded on, but unfortunately, they just leave and we never see them again. Also, I feel like we should have gotten a lot more flashbacks, because it's not till the very last 10 minutes of the movie where we get that very first flashback. I really wish there could have been split-second flashbacks, because I felt like that would have just added another layer to the story with him suddenly starting to remember things. And yes, I do admit that the flashback sequence is a cool sequence and all, but I do wish we could have had a couple more, because in the sequels, it just becomes a major thing in those movies. Other than that, I can't really find any real errors to this movie. I do think that there are a couple of continuity errors, but that's beyond nitpicking, guys. This movie is fantastic. I love the Bourne Identity. It absolutely holds up, and it's very hard to rank where I put this in the trilogy because they're pretty much even to me, and I might be giving them the same rating. If you haven't seen this movie, please watch it. The action is fantastic. The romance actually works. The car chases are just so well done. The direction is swift and the cinematography is just so good. This is a tense, awesome thriller, and it's just a great movie, guys. I'm going to give The Bourne Identity a solid A. Thank you guys so much for watching all my reviews. I just appreciate all your love and support. I'm going to be coming back at the end of next month to review The Bourne Supremacy, and then towards the end of that month to review The Bourne Ultimatum, right before Jason Bourne comes out. Guys, thank you so much for watching as always, and stay tuned.